I don't want to feed into the apocalypse frenzy, but we live in a moment of radical change. And these moments of radical change are changing the environments, landscapes, communities, knowledge systems, right, which are very much based on these, embedded within these like social structures and landscapes. So I wanted to maybe start off by asking all of the panelists about how these landscapes, how these communities that you're speaking to and engaging with, like how is their environment changing, how is their, whether socially and naturally, right? And how is that kind of affecting these knowledge systems and ways of seeing the world, right? Like, I think yesterday we talked briefly about how, for example, Monsanto, right, maybe industrial farming is potentially radically changing these landscapes in rural Spain. In the video, Pedro talks about fog as an indicator of snow, right? But fog is also potentially changing with climate change. So I'm just wondering maybe if the panelists could kind of address some of the historical forces that these communities are faced with and how that's kind of impacting their knowledge systems. And I don't know how we will start this, but maybe you want to start and then we can see about Jonathon.
Yeah, I mean, just to say that, I mean, when we brought this question to Pedro, it's like, okay, how do you see, like the whole thing about climate change and stuff? He says, well, I see it in the level of error that I have. You know what I mean? Like all of the indicators that should or were able to indicate, like all of these things are no longer working. Like I feel like if on Saint Joseph Day, like it starts in this way and ends in this way, not by. My conclusion will be this one, but it doesn't always happen. So basically, he's not like necessarily losing his powers, if we look at it in a superhero type of like language. But I mean, yeah, he sees how, for him, it's more difficult to foresee.
So has he given you any concrete examples of this? For example, right, like a particular change that made a particular prediction or let's say projection difficult?
I mean, he did, but also the thing is, he doesn't always disclose much, So for instance, he will say, on Wednesday says if they start like they end, and in the middle, it does whatever they want. So I mean, normally Wednesdays, like if they're sunny in the morning, it will be sunny at night, and during the rest of the day, it can be anything. But it's not every Wednesday. So he will say that, and then it will not happen, or even just by, not necessarily Pedro, but just by the farming season. I remember when I was a kid and I was going with my father and my brothers to the farm for the harvest, we will go in August. Now, by the end of July, my brother has finished all the harvest. So everything is just happening much, much, much earlier. So yeah, it's losing out. I mean, that's the thing. Like it becomes more, I mean, the floor is really shaking under your feet because you can predict less, you can foresee less, you can prepare less. And farming is all about preparation. It's about expecting and about guessing and about, projecting in the future. That's why they have this long-term vision, because they're continuously foreseen.
And I think this is something really important that we haven't addressed before, but it's temporality and time. I mean, when you are farming or when you are living on agriculture, it's not something you can learn in 2 days. This is not something that you can relate in one morning. I mean, it's a long time base knowledge that it's built throughout generations. And also, I mean, very much is happening, and I think it has to do with that speed is also being imposed into agriculture through many different politics, through many different, from the technification, technologies that are being introduced. So many of the grows that were traditional ones, they don't meet the production standards anymore. So they ripe on the trees, like kind of fruits, for example, they ripe on the trees, so it's not possible to transport them to the city, so then it's not useful anymore because you cannot sell them. It's really a sort of distribution, so it has changed a lot. And the support that agriculture is receiving, also because, we have to assume that we belong to a supranational states policy making, no? For example, in the case of Spain, like with all the agrarian politics, basically what is being funded and sponsored are like kind of these more technify and technical crops. So then it also changes the use of the landscapes. For example, where I come from, it's a region that it's in the mountain, and we used to have we do grow cherries, but cherries are really difficult to pick up. I mean, it's like it has many challenges. So people tend to go to the flat areas with irrigation systems that make it much more easier. You grow tobacco, that it's very much funded by the government, and you earn much more money than with a hash work. So that also has an impact. I don't know.
And Jonathan, maybe if you want to talk about, I mean, I know you mentioned a little bit the demarcation, right? And some of the encroaching of extraction enterprises on the Waurani territory, but also contact, right? And how maybe some of this is kind of changing the landscape, right, of the forest in which the Waurani live, and how that's, I mean, I think you gave some really great examples of how that's reflected in some of the legends, but also maybe how that's kind of translating into, I don't know, changing their practices or being reflected somehow in new stories.
Well, recently there's a Waurani woman leader. I apologize, I can't remember her name now because I haven't met her, but I've seen she's come out. There was in my slide presentation, there was a photo of her, how she came out in Time magazine. And then I was researching her, Nemonte, Nenkiwe, I think her name is. And I saw an article in the newspaper that she's the most famous Ecuadorian now, considered this, and I think she's just, it's not like she's trying to become famous or anything. She's just basically, responding to the situations that are occurring in their own unique way, struggling to try to make change to protect their way of life. The old Waurani warriors would go spearing the colonists, and now that it's a new time. And so she organized, and the Waurani women are taking the situation in their own hands, and they're very serious about protecting their way of life, which I really feel is fascinating. And also in the stories themselves about the spearing raids, always the woman didn't want the spearing raids to occur. They're always advocates for peace. But she recently oversaw a movement with a group of Waurani women and Waurani people and brought it to the courts. And they won a court hearing that banned one of the oil blocks from being given out in concession, and so they were very happy about that. And so I think that's a very fascinating new approach that the Waurani have taken on, is working with the legal system. It could be very frustrating because there's another court case that's been happening many years now against the Chevron Texaco. The Texaco corporation basically plowed full speed ahead into the Ecuadorian Amazon and left a terrible mess. And there's many oil wells that haven't been properly attended to, because the technology exists probably to lessen the impact. The thing is the race for grab that causes so much damage, the greed factor. And so I think that if there was really seriously concerned about greed and this blinded desire for more and more and more, was transformed into the appropriate use of technology, more equitative distribution of wealth, we probably see that we can enter into a new harmonious, maybe somewhat of a golden age. But unfortunately, for example, with the case against Texaco, they have paid more money, what I've heard, in their defense. And these corporations are very savvy and always protecting themselves. And so they always find a slight, slight situation that they can use in their advantage for appealing. They just go on and on and on. And they have huge panels of very highly funded lawyers that defend their interests. And instead of just admitting their fault and getting to the cleaning up of the mess, because in the northern Ecuadorian Amazon, there's some of the highest levels of cancer known on the planet from all the oil sludge that spills into the rivers and stuff. So it's a challenging thing, because on the one hand, we have a legal system, but the legal system is so corrupted as well too. But amazingly so, the Waurani recently won a lawsuit that allowed for a certain area of their land to not be given out. And then there's also new aspects of the Constitution of Ecuador that are being upheld now more, where they have the indigenous people need to be in consent. They can't corporations can't just go get what they want on someone else's land. They have to have the consent of the people. One of the things I didn't say that I think is important in my presentation, and I'm an ethnobotanist, but really my whole approach has been the new ethnobotany. It's a word that I coined, which is because I see that ethnobotany really where it's useful is amongst the communities where the plants are. And I've noticed that in these communities, different like Quechua villages that I've worked with, where they have a conscientious, very clearly defined conscientious understanding of the importance of their plant lore, they always protect the forest. Other indigenous families and communities where they've lost their plant lore just because they go along with the situation to the point where their elders die and they no longer have this knowledge, they're much more prone to practicing unsustainable land tenure, such as cattle ranching and logging. So I feel like the plants are really like the thread or the bridge that connect us with nature. So I really do feel that like on every possible level, it's very important. There's a Buddhist quote that says, in the end, we will conserve only what we love only what we understand, and understand what we are taught. So definitely at the core of all this is education. I want to compliment you for the beautiful presentation about the climate knowledge, and that it really comes back to finding ways to kindle our everyone's connection with nature. I'm not sure if that directly answers the question or not, but
it's great.
It's a very, very challenging situation, yeah.
It's great, and actually I have a follow-up question which touches perfectly, the follow-up question is for you, and it touches perfectly on this question of sustainability. I actually read some chapters from your book in preparation for this panel, and there was something in your introduction that I was super struck by. You said scientific materialism and corporate consumerism are two sides of the same coin, because they both focus more or less exclusively on the material, and they hold no room for spirit, energy, the supernatural. And you do this really beautiful job of kind of showing how the Waurani don't adhere to these like material, immaterial, visible, invisible dualisms, right, that are very present in Western influenced ways of thinking. And you yourself in the stories that you tell don't adhere to this dualism either. So we see, for example, in the destruction, in the flood legend, right, that there's a travel to meet grandfather creator, right, in the spiritual realm, and then a return, and there's these links between the spiritual and the material. And in the book, you talk about how some of this basically allows for the maintenance of a particular cosmic order, right? So the cosmic order is maintained through this travel back and forth between the spiritual and the material. And the cosmic order allows, I think it's basically that the Waurani travel, right, and then they talk to the gods, right, who are responsible for certain animals, and then come back and they can then sustainably hunt because the gods provide a certain number of animals, right, to them. So maybe if you could tell us a little bit about how this kind of about this cosmic order, right? And this very different, maybe, approach to sustainability, right? We hear a lot about sustainability, but this seems to be a very different approach. So what's unique about this cosmic order and this kind of spiritual and material travel?
That's a beautiful question. Thank you. Well, what comes to mind is that the indigenous people, they don't really believe in the concept of extinction like Westerners do. For example, the Sequoia in particular, they believe that like the role of the shaman is to enter into these abodes where the different chiefs of the animals live. And it's the chiefs of the animals that if you communicate with them, but these are extremely high energy abodes. So it's not ordinary people that can access these realms. It has to be like a shaman, someone who has experience of like, living under high intensity and extreme amounts of pressure. And so they can enter in and then very temporarily meet with the chiefs of the animals, and then the chiefs of the animals can release the animals out into the world for the people to hunt. And there's also another story about how the Sequoia protect their wilderness territory is through the lifting and lowering of the underworld mythic nets. They believe that there's these nets that they can, the shaman has the ability to, through their spiritual trances, through the drinking of the yahe, they can raise the nets and all the different fish and animal can come out. When they leave their wilderness home down on the Ecuadorian Peruvian border, they used to live in these very remote lakes. They would release different mythic creatures, such as ones that they called the Anyabaka or the Megoyi, electric eel, water dragon, and different mythic water creatures that when other people would go into their territory, they'd find it inhospitable and very difficult to stay there because all these like mythic creatures would like swallow them or like slap the boats off course. And so they had a very profound connection with nature, so that when they would return, they would do ceremonies to return back into the underworld, the different, powerful creatures that they'd have released, and then release all the hunting and fishing so that they could live happily there. So those are extraordinary supernatural abilities that back in the day, were considered natural for the people. Of course, that's something that's been lost now. We live in a, but I think in a more fundamental sense, that's probably one of the reasons, I think it's transcendentally important that people the world over return to a non-dualistic perspective, because when we enter into a non-dualistic perspective, the first thing that occurs is people can wake up with different universal virtues, with, like, for example, compassion. If we feel connected to something, we feel for that something. If we feel connected to nature, we're not separate, then we will feel for nature. And the more people that are concerned, I think the higher of an opportunity we have to recuperate redirect the direction that we all, so many of us know is not a healthy direction that as a humanity we're embarked upon. And I don't think anyone can know the future, if we have to undergo another apocalyptic phase of destruction as in the past. But I think that that's something that people everywhere can feel that is something they can do if we can start entering into more of an integral way of life, which includes just feeling the needs of others as if they were our own, feeling the pains and sorrows of others as if they were our own pains, feeling the joy of others as if they were our own joys. I think that we would be probably amazed how we can reshift the destiny of our planet.
Thank you. And then maybe to ask you.
If not the planet, at least our communities and our own lives.
Thank you. So just to ask you a question, because this is picking up on also something Asunción and Soledad, you had mentioned in your conversation, and it was something that we talked about earlier, was this question of hierarchies of knowledge, right? And I know that you're really invested in thinking about the rural as a space of knowledge production, right? And how there's different types of knowledge. And I find that sometimes in the conversation around things like indigenous science or indigenous knowledge or rural knowledge, there's this attempt to show that or an attempt to translate it in the terms of Western science, or an attempt to understand it as, equal to, because, what constitutes, for example, like Western modernist science, right, applies. So, that it's based on, things that are observed, it's based on everyday interaction. So there's this attempt to fit, maybe, right, these maybe, let's say, I don't even know if I want to use this word, because I don't even know, I feel we need a new language around it, but this idea of local ecological knowledge, right? That these local ecological knowledges then become equivalent to science, modern Western science, but on modern Western science's own terms. So how do we go beyond this, trying to fit one into the other? Because I feel in the process of doing that, we continue to reify these hierarchies.
Yeah, I could not agree more. No, and this is something that I don't think we can have a fixed position. I think it's a movement of forward and backward. So, for instance, the reason why I use the word intellectual when I define a farmer, I do it on purpose, meaning I want to have these two images that have been as opposite, put together in one sentence, because I had to explain this a million times in different contexts, because this is something that a lot of people will be on denial. So I don't use the word sabio, wise man, or something that it will be more belonging to, our language in the rural areas, because I know this word is also not going to be taken serious. So I need to borrow the language from, academy or science or whatever, to be able to get attention for a period of time. Because I know then the next step is also about transforming language, or even bringing up, it will be ideal that cabañuelas as a term, it will be used one day, for weather forecasting without needing to explain what a cabañuela is or whatever. So, but until we get there, I think it's important just to have a lot of flexibility and playing with language until we get to the point where we have a new language. I don't know, just to, again, to provoke thoughts. So if I can think of, like, for instance, one of the works that I did, I wrote a CV for what a farmer does, or a female farmer, a male farmer from León, like a region in Spain. And I read a lot of, like, CVs from people who were working in academy, in development agencies and stuff, and those considered knowledge workers. So what's considered a knowledge worker is someone who maybe is just like uploading data to an online platform. It's not producing knowledge, but it's uploading knowledge. And then, why is not considered a knowledge producer? Someone like Pedro, who is actually producing knowledge. So basically what I did borrow language, this language, you know, of like, to describe what these guys do in other people's terms so it can be seen. So I think the whole thing about using, you know, like Western language or like intellectual academy, it can be something that, yes, sometimes reinforces and is like, okay, why we have to call it, you know, university, or why we have to call it indigenous science, because I think it's important for a period of time to reclaim that that's also science. And then we can dismantle science and then understand what science is. Masalan, you know, like, I don't know.
But also, I mean, it requires...
No, it's fine. She was just showing me a sign of minutes.
So it requires a certain degree of generosity, because it means that us that hold that knowledge have to open ourselves to leave aside a bit of a space and break categories. No, there is a work of unlearning, but also of giving a space, and giving a space is a kind of generosity, and that's something that we have to really work on. No, it's because I think that every decision, I mean, there is a political decision on everything we do, and part of that should be re-qualifying ourselves, and maybe giving something of that we have learned, no, we have been granted because of certain access to certain privileges.
No, and also by being exposed to all of this, is like having the humbleness to consider oneself as an ignorant, you know, and I have that as a blessing. I mean, there's nothing that can be seen as a better blessing than being an ignorant for some time, because then there's the possibility of learning. So when we were doing the film and stuff, you know, at the end of the day, like Sonia, Alberto, and me, when we were on our own, just recognizing we don't know anything about the world. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, but just keep ourselves in place and pretend we know.
No, you don't know anything about that. I mean, that world. No, precisely is that there are, like what Jonathon was saying. There are so many communities that build a wall. Maybe we have to stop also thinking about that idea of the one world and assuming difference as a way of building together. That's
interesting. And then I guess maybe I'll ask one more question and then I'll open it up to the audience. And my last question is to you, Jonathon. It's again about something that you mentioned in your book, which I found quite thought-provoking and beautiful, which is that there's a significance to preserving these knowledge systems. And it's not just about preserving a tradition, but it's also about a way of building and presenting radical futures in a plural way, right? And I'm just wondering maybe if you could expand on this a little bit. But also, particularly in the context of the Amazon, right? Like, there's been a lot written about, for example, how pharmaceuticals have been working, you know, with maybe some members of the indigenous community expropriating knowledge, right, to produce patented medicines. Or there's a turn to, you know, like ayahuasca retreats or tourism, right? So I'm just wondering, like, maybe how do we then, you know, like think about how do we preserve this for radical futures and yet at the same time maybe like escape capture? I don't know if that makes sense.
Your questions are very, very auspicious, thought-provoking. Thank you so much. I guess one thing that comes to mind is I study permaculture, and so there's a concept in permaculture where diversity engenders stability, and stability engenders fertility. So there's like this cycle, there's an interconnected cycle between diversity, fertility, and stability. And there's no sense, like there's nothing that can be escaped. That's also important to understand, that we can't escape anything. All we can do is attempt to try our best to redirect it, to reshift the direction of things. And we live in a very challenging time, not because And this is another thing. The Guaranis, they talk about it too somewhat, but mainly the Sequoia, who are drinkers of the sacred plant medicine of Yahe, they're very aware of this, and the elders too, that it's this concept of like illusion. Like for example, Don Cesario, beautiful Sequoia elder, he's still alive, he's over 100 years old now. He said to me once that when his grandfather, he said to him, when I'm gone, he said his grandfather, if I come to you in a dream and I offer you to drink Yahe in my dream, you have to chop me to pieces in the dream. It's not going to be me, it's going to be an illusion. And sure enough, there was a time after his grandfather passed that he had a dream of his grandfather coming to him beautifully dressed with tunic, ceremonial regalia, and offered him to drink Yahe in the dream. And he remembered his grandfather's voice. And he chopped him in the dream to pieces. And all these wati, these like malicious trickster spirits floated out of in the dream. And so we live in a time where maybe what's worked in the past might not work for the future. We're like surfing a wave. We have to be very sensitive to really, but that's what's so beautiful about this symposium. And it's really important that people come together, because not one person is going to have the absolute questions, but many people with their experiences coming together, respecting each person's diversity, respecting each person's place. And you have mentioned, the globalist, sort of mentality. I'm not sure if it's going to work, because there isn't one. The planet is made up of many, like a beautiful fabric. It's like, the fabric is beautiful because there's many different beautiful designs on the fabric. So it really is about honoring each person's place within the fabric that makes us a beautiful whole. It's not about like a white sheet. We're all the same on that, in that whole. And so, these are very, very challenging topics to discuss. I so appreciate your questions, but I'm not sure if I'm answering them as correctly as I would like to even have the ability to do so.
On that note, maybe we open the floor to questions if anyone in the audience has any questions for the speakers. Sorry.
Thank you for this beautiful presentation and these insights. I have a comment and a question. Regarding the film and this intangible heritage, the road to discovering more about it can be through the Middle East. There is what we call ilm al-bawahir, that is still very alive in Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine. And it's all about similar patterns of understanding the climate and forecasting. And bawahir comes from a word that means to forecast. So this might be one of the doors to go to take. And also this film, have you considered transforming it into an educational tool for schools? Because as we know, putting aside the rural heritage is a form of dynamics of power, and always portraying the rural as something that is rather exotic or a place where we have to be just for a weekend. And so, I do think that reconnecting students with this heritage might be interesting. Have you considered pairing with pedagogues, teachers, and bringing that to the schools, not universities, to schools?
Yeah, I have considered different things, but not in that direction. Not like teaching in a school, which is again the places where learning happens, like reverse the thing. You know what I mean? Meaning like proposing going and spending a day helping a shepherd is a learning experience, maybe richer than having a shepherd in a school setting with a presentation like this. The way I do cabañuelas, this is one challenge. The second challenge is Pedro is not willing to teach anybody anything of his secrets. I mean, he's super, super, super like, only Cristina is the one entitled, because under his understanding of cabañuelas, it has to be by blood connection. There's something that goes within the construction of your body, there's something that you inherit. So he didn't have children, and his niece is the one who is inheriting. There are other people doing cabañuelas in the world that are not shepherds, are really interesting scholars. Some of them are medievalistas, they were looking in the medieval times and stuff, and they know a lot, and they could totally do that work, but it will lose what I think is the most important element, which is the experience. So the way of learning cabañuelas is like, if you really want to take it serious, take a 5 years break from whatever you're doing and go and be milking or early in the morning, suffering all of the weather and all of the, and then you will, you will work hard to get how to forecast weather. And also to understand that it's something that if Pedro then has been mastering this, and he learned also from his family, now he's dealing with the challenges of not being able to foresee because the weather is changing. Those who are starting to learn now, they have even more difficulties. You know, it's adding up another layer of, a struggle. I don't know.
Any more questions from the audience? No questions? No. There's 2 questions.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I have something in parallel to the question that was asked. In your imagination of this merging of different knowledge systems, much like what we were discussing where Pedro thinks that it has to be through blood, what the modern or the Western knowledge system does is it has these gatekeepers that do not allow for knowledge to be accessible and widely spread. And in that sense, the narrative that you're saying about Pedro also seems like there is this gatekeeping of knowledge, right? So how do you, in your aspiration of merging the 2 cultures, see a vision where there could be perhaps a lack of hierarchy?
Yeah. I mean, when I fantasize, you know, because if we're thinking about imagination, when I fantasize about, oh my God, what are the things I would like to do, and there was this period of time where I wanted to be Minister of Agriculture, and then I dropped the idea. So I will like, okay, if we ever like in the future manage to get in all of the decision-making panels, a shepherd, a farmer, as an expert, you know, in the category of an expert, that's like, you know, Haram, I can die happy, and you know what I mean, like in terms of like, so it's about decision-making at the end of the day, because the symbolic world is very important, we need it and everything, but at the end of the day, because it's also a matter of speed, you know what I mean, and you know, how can we react to the challenges we have, is like, I can tell you like a million of examples about how many problems could have been not even existed if there was a shepherd or a farmer in one of the tables deciding on Política Agraria Común, you know, the agrarian European policy. Because lots of mistakes would have been avoided just by listening to these people. You know, every time that somebody designs a policy based on, they have experts advising, but as we said, or as Jonathon was proposing, no, it's about having the broader variety of, because everybody, we can just cover one area. So it's about getting, you know, the multiple perspective, because somebody is going to say, hey, hold on, maybe that idea is very good, but in practice it's not going to operate because of this and this and this circumstances. So in the fantasy will be just having them as experts and consider in all of the decision making in order to, but then, yeah. I don't know.
So going in that direction, I almost wonder then why not also have a platform in schools where you do that, but you also offer the field trips, you know, you do the 5-year gap, whatever, and go learn it as well, so that education is not just one way of doing it, but there are multiple ways of actually accessing it.
Yeah, I mean, Pedro has been in schools, I have to say, not through anything that I have proposed. It's something that the schools in Segovia, they have an agreement with him, and he goes once a year, and he's been inquired about many things, not only about Cabañuelas, but what the life was like when he was a young boy, I mean, how the political situation was, what it means, like, so there are these exchanges, and yes, as you said, yeah, it's not about either one way or another, but I mean, like, when we think about, like, what could be the one that it affects you the deepest in a way, I still keep thinking that the noise through experience. I mean, and the other day talking to a person who is a psychologist, she was telling me that you cannot learn in somebody else's skin. You know, it's like you have to embody the knowledge by, you know, or you know what's, you want to know what is a wedding, like get married, you know what I mean? Or you want to, I mean, I don't know. Maybe everything except death, because you want to know what's that like? No, don't kill yourself.
Well, I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say that, well, it's a beautiful message, actually, that I personally can take away from what you and Jonathon has said about living together and respecting each community or any kind of science. Well, I wouldn't use the word science as such, but any kind of knowledge that anybody has. I remember, just to say a few words, I remember quite a long time ago when I gave it was a public lecture about medicinal plants, which I had been researching in northern Oman. And I gave this very enthusiastically of what I had learned, and a voice at the back of the hall said, "Would you try these medicines?" And I didn't know what to say. I was quite flabbergasted because, to be truthful, I wouldn't. I haven't lived in that way. I haven't lived up in the way that these people do and trust the plants. I wouldn't do that. I've been brought up eating aspirins and, you know, that sort of thing. And I can't remember what I must have made some answer to that. But later on, I really did think about it, and I thought, well, it's very important that we respect somebody's intelligence, and I do call it intelligence, of the people who do actually live on the mountains or wherever and use the system that they're used to. If I lived in those circumstances, I would certainly use those plants because those will be the ones I grew up with. So you cannot just negate somebody like your Pedro, he's learned all his life, you know, the kind of weather forecasting. You cannot commercialize it as well, just because it didn't snow on one day that he had said, and the whole thing was so badly commercialized. We must, you know, learn how to respect other people's knowledge, whatever it may be, small or big. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that answers the question.
Following up actually on this last comment, I was actually really curious to ask you, Jonathan, about this integration and embodiment of research over the past 30 years. Maybe a little bit personal, but I'm wondering what sort of integrations have you made of the research into your own lifestyle? I'm just really curious.
Well, when I was working in the Amazon later with the sequoia in particular, I almost went crazy because it was so difficult to see the onslaught and the destruction. Someone who loves nature and loves the forest and loves plants and loves the culture. It's very challenging to see. Living out there with these native communities and watching the oil companies, roads being plowed through, the development that's coming, the towns building, and also like nothing good about it. Like the worst parts of Western culture, like the absolute, like, you know, like trash of modernization is what gets out there. And so it's very, very challenging, very difficult. But then eventually I had a very peak experience where I'm not sure if I copped out or it was a way of me just like, you know, being able to just navigate it. But I basically had to surrender to realizing that everything is sacred. And then maybe it's just my own mind that's creating the illusion of separation, that one thing is better than the other. I'm not sure if that, at least it brought me a little bit more peace and allowed me to continue working out there without going crazy. So we have to be, you know, present if, you know, to be able to tackle these situations. So it's the non-dual perspective to me is really essential to being able to like approach these complicated matters, because otherwise if we're too radical in our opinions, then we can basically go nuts, man. This is a serious situation, and it really takes a very deep level of commitment and to forge an opening and change. So that's something that it's hard to really describe in words, but it didn't come just like, oh, everything's sacred. It came with like a very profound, like, you know, I basically cried for like almost a week straight, and then just like surrendered to the fact that if it was only happening in my little Ecuador, maybe okay, but it's the world over. So it must be something that we all as a humanity have to undergo as a challenge, as a spiritual test in a way, and it gives us something really, really big to work on. And I encourage everyone and to somehow we have to like tackle the situation. We can't be left unattended, but we have to be grounded in our approach to dealing with it, because otherwise, like I say, if you get too you know, like you can't be too like, you know, attached to any one side or the other. We just have to be kind of centered. So that's one thing that happened to me along the way that allowed me to continue the work, because I probably would have just chewed up and spat out if I was, if I didn't just surrender to accepting everything as sacred.
Any more questions? There's one more question. Okay.
Hi.
Last one.
This is more of a comment or a thinking out loud. I loved what you said, Asunción, about this idea of, let's say, peasants as decoders of a somewhat encrypted landscape and as thinkers in their own right, obviously. But I'm just wondering, given that these are secrets that are shared by blood, or that there's a certain respect surrounding these forms of knowledge, what are other ways or formats of kind of creating a living archive of this knowledge beyond participatory artworks, which, let's face it, are accessible to only people who know of these online platforms? And beyond schools and institutions, like, what are other ways to form an archive that can only be at best fragmented but still lives on? I was wondering.
Yeah, I mean, so basically when I think about this idea of preservation and some of the things that were thought about, or the idea of archive and stuff like this, is at the end is like, okay, there isn't a better archive, or there isn't a better, like anything that life itself with all of its complexity. You know what I mean? So what I will do is like, okay, the best, and when I was thinking about what's happening to us, because I didn't say this in the beginning, I come from a village and we are only 40 houses. I come from a farming family. The idea of extinction, it has been in me from very young age. We are ending what's going to happen to us, what's going to happen with our conception of the world, and. So I was thinking in terms of preserving, if I was going to be a restorer or of some type, it's like, what we need to, in order to exist is get our dignity back. You know what I mean? If we are being respected, and I will elaborate also on Shahina's comment and what Jonathon said, it's not only about respecting and getting dignity, it's about honoring. That's the top level, you know what I mean? Like, if you really want to find, perpetuate lives in and respecting everybody's ways of doing, is by developing this mutual honoring. I honor you, you honor me, like all of the factors that compose our lives, whether it's like somebody who decides to take an aspirin or to chew a piece of a plant or whatever. And if we reach that level of like, honoring and giving back dignity, then that's the end of the extension, that's the end of the process. We don't need to have preservation systems or archives or anything, because we will be able to exist in the future, I mean,
that's where a comment related to that's where the work comes in too, is finding the ways that we can honor, finding the ways to honor. That's where children can get involved and everyone can participate, because there's so many. Like, just one example I was sharing about the new ethnobotany this word that I coined. So like, I saw that the knowledge of the plants is much more valuable in the forest, because we need the forest as a humanity for climate stability, and it keeps the people healthy. So I thought of this, I got inspired, and I thought of this way of like, I said, everybody here, because I went to this one village where we were working, and we started talking about this and said, we don't know much about plants. Can you show us some plants? And I laughed at myself. Well, here I am, an outsider, going to show them about their own plants. So I thought for a while, and I thought, okay, everyone here must know at least one plant. How about let's all go find that plant and come back, and then we'll see what comes together. And sure enough, everyone brought like a different plant. And then after the half hour, I said, look, now we've just raised the common body of knowledge. So it's just one small example. So I think that's where the true work comes in, is finding the ways for the honoring to occur.
Definitely.
And I think that's a great moment to end, and a great comment. Thank you very much for that. I know that we've run out of time, unfortunately. I know I myself had many more questions, but I think we can continue the conversation over the coffee break. Thank you very much, everyone, for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.